Well, good morning, everybody. Jeff Slickey here on Daybreak. I've got a great guest in studio to talk about shellfish and Mason County. I want to say good morning to Commissioner Terri Drexler. Morning.
Good morning, Jeff.
Thanks for coming on the air with me. You know, I saw on your Facebook feed, I don't know, it was earlier in the month, you posted a great little thing there about Mason County being a shellfish Mecca, grower told you recently. So I says, oh, man, I know Terri loves the shellfish industry, as a lot of us do here in the county. So a good opportunity to bring her on, talk a little bit about this. I know you're trying to get Mason County on the map as the shellfish capital of the world, and maybe this is one good way to start us off here. So talk to me a little bit about where you got that information and what it really means in the county and how it helps all of the county, not just along the waterways.
Absolutely. So I have asked the Mason County Commissioners to consider launching a Mason County Shellfish Initiative.
Okay.
And in my discussions with all the stakeholders, this wouldn't just be a county function. It would be all of the people in the community who work to grow the aquaculture industry, to protect the aquaculture industry, and to create opportunities in the recreational aquaculture.
Okay.
And that would include restaurants even and those sorts of things. And there's many, many things going on. And this would be modeled after the state shellfish initiative to some extent.
Okay.
I wanted us as a county to be the first out the door to do a countywide one that would be supported by the state. About a week ago, I had a meeting with the Department of Health and a staff member from the governor's office and some shellfish growers about some of the areas we would need to work on prior to launching this initiative.
Okay.
During that conversation, the grower that was there at the meeting said, Mason County is a shellfish Mecca. He said he has seen shellfish and aquaculture production throughout the world, and he says he's never seen the productivity levels that we get here in Mason County. And I asked him, why?
Yeah.
What makes that the case? And he says, primarily, it's because the phytoplankton, which is the food that they eat, is just pervasive here. There's so much more here, so we can grow an animal a lot faster than you can in other places. He suspects that, unfortunately, it might be a function of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge constricting the flow in and flow out, so it stays on back here. But that's not been proven scientifically.
Sure. It's a good story, though. It makes a little sense if you think about it. Wow. That's a really impressive notch in the cap for Mason County then.
It truly is. And I've heard stories such or facts such as our Oakland Bay area up towards, beyond on Highway 3 going up to the end of it produces more clams than any other place in the nation.
Wow.
And we think a lot about the Louisiana area and the shellfish industry there, but whether it be Katrina or just the fact that they don't culture that animal. It's mostly just the wild grown. What we've done here in Mason County specifically in our shellfish growers, and it's just a handful of them, in order to get enough product to meet an insatiable market. I mean, it's an insatiable market. We've developed our technologies to spawn the animal, to bring it to a nursery level, and you'll see we have flepsies, they're called, along our shorelines. If you go north out of the city of Shelton on Highway 3, if you look immediately to your right onto the water, you see this little production. You're not quite sure what it is, and it's basically taking the teeniest, tiniest little animal and growing it into a nursery form of maybe a half-inch to a 1-inch product that then gets planted. Another interesting thing we've done here with in Mason County to innovate. What I love about this industry is they innovate like crazy. And the most popular oyster, but so hard to get, is called the Kumamoto.
Yeah.
The half-shell industry is growing much more than just the shelled product that's used for various sauces and stuff, especially in the Asian area. But that half-shell market, you want a nice cup to it. And the Kumamoto does that beautifully, so it makes it a sought-after oyster. Well, we've taken the industry has taken the Pacific oyster, which is a pretty common oyster, and through a growing technique that tumbles it by suspending it rather than having it sit on the ground, it it creates that cup. And so now we have an easier to get oyster that's now extremely marketable, although that still gives the cachet value to the Kumamoto, because now you're asking, is it a Kumamoto or is it a Pacific?
And so these are what you're saying is these are the ones where people will sit at the fine restaurants all around and say, give me 12 on the half shell.
Absolutely.
And they come out looking beautiful. Isn't that something?
And again, this is an insatiable market. One of our larger shellfish growers, I would ask him on a regular basis, how's business? He says, broke another sales record. We have a Chinese company that came to our larger producer and wanted to start doing business for him. And their first order alone would have taken their entire inventory.
Wow.
The Asian market is just basically untapped, and we have a growing market here domestically in the United States. So we have a lot of energy going around. How can we produce more product? And that's what the Shellfish Initiative would focus on, as well as focusing on the value-added piece. An example would be our local smaller growers, and there's many of them, have to keep their product cool in order to get it to the buyer. And when you go to harvest in the middle of the night and your buyer isn't coming until midday the next day, the effort to keep it cool is so tough. So the Port of Shelton has been studying the idea of creating a co-op refrigeration warehouse.
Okay.
So so many different growers could come in and be part of the cost of that, but
Right.
it would help them keep them in business and against some of their bigger competition with their smaller amount of product. Mason County also has 25,000 acres that are classified by the Department of Health and Fish and Wildlife as shellfish growing areas. Now, classification doesn't necessarily mean there is growing going on there, but it is the most acreages through the 19 counties that actually have shellfish production. It is, we rank 6th as the number of acres. And we have there's different types of classifications, and out of the 19 counties, we are 12th, which is a good thing, low in prohibited acres, meaning acres that because of a risk, not because it's bad water quality, but the risk of the water quality, such as right outside of a sewer outfall.
Okay.
Whether or not that's safe, it's just that the risk is higher, so it would be prohibited. Where we have issues is something called approved or conditionally approved acres. Now, you want to keep your acres approved, but a conditionally approved acre means that there's a constant studying of the water quality, and after a certain number of questionable fecal coliform hits, to reduce risk of infection, disease, etc., the Department of Health will will reclassify those acres to be conditionally approved, which means if the area receives 1 inch of rainfall over a 24-hour period, you have to wait 5 days before you can harvest your product. Again, if I am a shellfish producer and I have to wait 5 days, that's 5 days of no income.
Yeah.
And if you're on the margin, that's tough. We have areas of our shorelines that we're having a really hard time keeping in the approved area. The sources of contamination can vary tremendously, but we're seeing hits in areas that we hadn't seen before. The North Bay area near Allen.
Okay.
A very, very productive gooey duck growing area, which is another fun product I'd love to talk about at some point, did get downgraded, unfortunately, to a conditionally approved. Now, this is an area that's served by septic, by sewer, almost exclusively, which tends to help maintain the water quality because it's being treated before it's released. And what we finally found out was because we'd had such dry seasons, when we hit a hard rainfall like we did this spring, some of the fecal coliform matters were now being drained into the North Bay area, but it was on a consistent enough level. So there's so many ways we need to be on top of the potential pollution sources of that. Mason County has been very blessed to have grant funding to pay for our water quality programs. And these are guys boots on the ground checking septic systems and dye testing whenever there's an issue. But because it's grant funded, it tends to be focused in an area where the grant was written to take care of. And so we can't do the county-wide program of a water quality program. So another piece of a Shellfish initiative would be, how do we sustainably fund a water quality program and not be dependent on grant funding? Your shellfish growers will tell you that when you have this unsustainable funding, there's a direct correlation between the water quality going down and the approved acres now moving to conditionally approved. There are many different ways and sources of where this water quality degradation happens, and sometimes it's animals that are on shorelines, and then they're what animals do will go on into the waters. Sometimes it's failing septic systems, and people don't always know that their septic system is failing. We were told a story of a shellfish grower. This person had their way of life and their income on their own tidelands. He had a failing septic system and didn't even know it until it was conditionally improved. It got downgraded, and then when we went to go do the dye testing, found out that it was his own septic system. And this is somebody who's had everything at stake to make sure that his septic system is going. So that's why we do have every 3 years, if you have a gravity system, it must be inspected, because we don't always know our septic is failing.
Wow. So people who may not even be associated with the shellfish industry, perhaps though living along the waterways, can have some real serious impact on this.
Absolutely, and we have 22% of the housing units in Mason County are recreational or weekenders, and a lot of those, of course, are on the water. And they don't always know what's on top. Plus, when you have a system that potentially could not be used for quite a while, and then grandma and the kids, and you have a big party, and now you've overloaded perhaps sometimes your system. There's many things that can happen, and there's not just one problem, but maintaining a good water quality program is essential to keeping our industry alive and well, and especially our small growers. They get affected tremendously because not all of them are using these new technologies of growing that some of our largers can. And that's mostly suspended, the new technology of suspending the growing nets, they're called. And if anybody wants to see how this is done, Taylor Shellfish I think about 10 years ago, started doing oyster seed sales and the growing products. And the next one is this weekend. 8 a.m. at the Taylor Shellfish
get in line early, right?
business right there on Lynch Road.
People wait there
and
a
then
long
just
time.
come take a look at what does the seed look like, what does the growing product look like, how are people growing for their own pleasure on their own waterfront, and those seed sales were begun just to help water front owners to be aware of how important water quality is and what their role is in maintaining that water quality. And it's a fun little thing to be able to bring your guests from, New York or Montana out down to your shoreline
I
and
just happen to have
open
some
up
right
an oyster.
Very
Yes.
cool. One other thing, in addition to the shellfish industry that is shellfish centric here in Mason County, is Oysterfest, which is upcoming.
Our
And
huge
I know you're
festival.
very well involved with Oysterfest, and I had heard that there is a new Friday event
Yes,
in
there
the
is.
evening. Tell us quickly about that.
So thankfully, and we're very happy that the Skookum Rotary is partnering more and more with the Shelton Rotary on Oysterfest as well as other things. And so the Shelton Rotary is going to hold a Friday night burgers and live music and beers event. I don't recall the starting time, but this is an opportunity for all of our RV folks that come into Oysterfest. We get 400
Oh, yeah.
RVs last year to have something to do on that Friday night, and then bring in the community as well. And then our Shelton Rotary gets to raise some monies for their own philanthropic purposes.
Oh, fun. That'll be a lot of fun.
And we're also very thankful that the Shelton Rotary has taken on our cook-off. Our
good.
seafood cook-off as their event, and they will be probably bringing on a new flavor, new ideas around it. And I also want to thank 501 for sponsoring our family entertainment stage this year.
Going to be a
Appreciate
good time.
that.
Oysterfest, always a great time. Mason County Commissioner, District 3 here in the county, Terri Drexler. Nice talking with you. Good to see you.
Nice to talk to you. Take care.